The echoes beyond the mirror. Chapter 1. The autumn wind whispered through the streets as Alex Monroe stepped off the city bus, the scent of rain and decaying leaves heavy in the air. He pulled his jacket tighter, glancing at the crumpled letter in his hand. The ornate lettering of Hamilton and Sons, attorneys at law, stood out against the cream paper, an unexpected summons to the reading of a will. His great-uncle Frederick, a man he barely remembered, had passed away. The law office loomed ahead, a relic amongst modern glass towers. Inside, mahogany walls and dim lighting evoked a bygone era. Alex was ushered into a room where a stern-looking lawyer sat behind a polished desk. "Mr. Monroe," the lawyer began, adjusting his glasses, "thank you for coming on such short notice." Alex nodded, settling into the leather chair. "I was surprised to hear from you. I didn't really know my great-uncle." "Understandable," the lawyer replied. "Nevertheless, he has left you a significant item from his estate." He slid a photograph across the desk. An antique mirror with an intricately carved frame stared back at Alex. The wood was dark, almost black, adorned with swirling patterns that seemed to writhe and twist if he looked too long. "A mirror?" Alex raised an eyebrow. "An heirloom," the lawyer said. "Dates back to the late 1700s. It's been in your family for generations." Alex studied the photo. Something about the mirror drew him in, a peculiar magnetism that made his fingertips tingle. "Why me?" The lawyer hesitated. "Your great-uncle was quite insistent. He believed you were the rightful owner." Before Alex could press further, the lawyer stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "The mirror has been delivered to your residence. All the necessary paperwork is in order." Stepping back onto the sidewalk, Alex felt the weight of the encounter settle in. The city bustled around him, people hurrying along wet streets slick with reflected neon. He pocketed the photograph and made his way home. His apartment was a modest one-bedroom, nestled above a row of shops. As he approached, he noticed a large package by his door, draped in cloth and secured with twine. A delivery receipt was pinned to it, his name scrawled in neat handwriting. Struggling to maneuver the unwieldy object inside, he finally unwrapped it in his living room. The mirror stood taller than he'd anticipated. The frame's carvings were even more elaborate in person, serpents intertwined with vines, their eyes made of tiny glinting stones. He caught his reflection and paused. For a moment, it seemed as though the room behind him was different, darker, shadows pooling in the corners. He blinked, and the image was normal, just his own tired face staring back. Shaking off the unease, Alex leaned the mirror against the wall. His phone buzzed, a text from his friend Marcus, reminding him of their study group tomorrow. Grateful for the distraction, he replied, before heading to the kitchen to fix a late dinner. That night, sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned, fragments of strange dreams slipping through his consciousness. Whispers he couldn't quite make out, eyes watching from unseen places. He awoke in a cold sweat just before dawn, the room tinged with the grey light of early morning. Rubbing his eyes, he walked into the living room. The mirror stood where he'd left it, but something was off. The air felt heavier, the silence deeper. Approaching the mirror, he noticed faint markings along the frame that he hadn't seen before, tiny symbols etched into the wood. He traced a finger over them. The patterns were intricate, resembling no language he knew. A chill ran down his spine. Pulling out his phone, he snapped a few pictures. Maybe someone at the university could help identify them. As the city stirred to life outside, Alex tried to shake off the lingering sense of unease. It was just an old mirror, he told himself. An antique with some strange carvings, that's all. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that his inheritance was more than it seemed. Chapter 2. Classes passed in a blur the next day. Alex sat through lectures on modern literature and statistical analysis, his mind drifting back to the mirror and its cryptic symbols. During a break, he showed the photos to Marcus and their friend Jenna as they sat outside the campus coffee shop. "That's creepy," Jenna said, sipping her latte. "Where did you say you got this mirror?" "My great-uncle left it to me," Alex replied. "I found these symbols etched into it. Thought maybe one of you might recognize them." Marcus leaned in, squinting at the images. "Looks like old runes or something, maybe Celtic." "Could be," Alex said. "I was thinking of checking with Professor Langley. He specializes in ancient languages." Jenna shrugged. "Worth a shot. But seriously, why would your uncle leave you something like that out of the blue?" "No idea," Alex admitted. "I didn't even know he knew who I was." "Maybe he was a collector," Marcus offered. "Or maybe it's worth a fortune." Alex laughed, but the thought hadn't occurred to him. Could the mirror be valuable? Though if that were the case, why entrust it to a relative he'd never met? After their last class, Alex made his way to Professor Langley's office. The door was ajar, and the familiar scent of old books wafted out. He knocked lightly. "Come in," the professor's voice called. "Professor Langley," Alex began, stepping inside. "I was wondering if you could help me with something." "Ah, Mr. Monroe, isn't it?" Langley adjusted his glasses. "What can I do for you?" Alex explained about the mirror, showing him the photos of the symbols. The professor's eyes widened ever so slightly as he examined them. "Interesting," Langley murmured. "These are not Celtic, nor are they any runes I'm familiar with. They bear a resemblance to certain archaic sigils associated with medieval occult practices." "Occult?" Alex repeated, a knot forming in his stomach. Langley nodded. "Yes, symbols used in rituals to ward off or summon entities, for lack of a better term. Do you think they mean anything specific?" "It's hard to say without seeing them in person," the professor replied. "But I would advise caution. Objects bearing such markings often have a history." "A history?" The words lingered in Alex's mind as he left the office. Back at his apartment, dusk was settling in. He hesitated before unlocking his door, half expecting something to be amiss inside. The mirror greeted him from its place against the wall. The symbols seemed more pronounced now, shadows accentuating their grooves. He stood before it, examining his reflection. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw movement behind him, a dark shape darting out of sight. He spun around. Nothing. The apartment was empty. "It's just your imagination," he muttered. Yet the sensation of being watched was palpable. That night, as he prepared for bed, he draped a sheet over the mirror. It was a silly gesture, but it brought a small measure of comfort. Sleep came easier, though his dreams were filled with indistinct faces and whispers he couldn't understand. In the early hours of the morning, a sound stirred him awake, a faint rustling, like fabric brushing against wood. His eyes snapped open. The room was cloaked in darkness, but he could make out the shape of the mirror across the living room, the sheet he'd placed over it now pooled on the floor. A cold dread settled over him. Heart pounding, he forced himself to approach the mirror. His reflection stared back, wide-eyed and pale. Behind him, in the depths of the glass, shadows swirled unnaturally. He backed away, refusing to turn around, afraid of what he might or might not see. Retreating to his bedroom, he closed the door and sat against it, sleep banished for the rest of the night. Chapter 3. The following morning, fatigue clung to Alex like a shroud. Dark circles underlined his eyes as he navigated the campus halls, the chatter of students a distant hum. He found himself drawn back to Professor Langley's office, hoping for more insights into the mirror's symbols. "Back so soon, Mr. Monroe?" Langley looked up from a stack of papers. "Sorry to bother you again, but I was wondering if there's any literature you could recommend on those symbols," Alex said. Langley leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "As a matter of fact, there's a compendium on archaic iconography in the restricted section of the library. I could arrange access for you." "That would be great," Alex replied, a glimmer of relief piercing his anxiety. An hour later, Alex was hunched over a massive tome in a secluded corner of the library's basement. Faded illustrations and dense text filled the pages, detailing symbols used in ancient rituals and forbidden practices. His fingers traced over a drawing that mirrored the carvings on his mirror, a sigil associated with the Watcher, a mythical entity said to exist between realms, observing humanity through reflective surfaces. "The Watcher," he whispered. The description was vague but ominous, an ever-present eye, a bridge between worlds, neither benevolent nor malevolent but utterly alien. A sudden chill swept through the room, rustling the pages. Alex glanced around, half expecting to see someone behind him, but he was alone. Shaking off the unease, he snapped photos of the relevant pages before closing the book and making his way out. Back at his apartment, daylight waned as clouds gathered, casting the room in muted tones. The mirror seemed to absorb the dim light, its surface darker than before. He stood before it, the weight of his discovery pressing upon him. "Is this what you are?" he murmured, touching the frame. "A gateway for some Watcher?" As if in response, the room's temperature plummeted. His breath fogged the air, and a faint whisper brushed past his ear, indistinct but real. He stumbled back, heart racing. Grabbing a notepad, he copied the symbols from the mirror, comparing them to the photos from the book. They were identical. Questions swirled in his mind. Why had his great-uncle given him this mirror? Had he known about its nature? Determined to find answers, Alex searched online archives for any mention of Frederick Monroe and occult practices. Buried in obscure forums and digitized newspaper clippings, he found references to his great-uncle's involvement with esoteric societies and whispered rumors of dark rituals. A sense of betrayal mingled with fear. This inheritance was no heirloom. It was a burden, perhaps even a curse. As night settled in, Alex contemplated covering the mirror again, but hesitated. If the Watcher was real, hiding wouldn't help. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. "Show yourself," he said softly, eyes locked on his reflection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the surface of the mirror shimmered, and a shadow unfurled behind his reflected form, a tall, indistinct figure, with eyes like voids. Alex's breath caught in his throat. The figure raised a hand, and though it was merely a reflection, Alex felt an icy touch on his shoulder. Panic overtook him, and he staggered back, tripping over the coffee table and crashing to the floor. When he looked up, the mirror was just a mirror once more, his own terrified face staring back. He scrambled to his feet and fled the room, slamming the bedroom door behind him. Sleep was impossible. He sat with his back against the door, clutching a baseball bat for comfort, until the first light of dawn seeped through the window. Chapter 4. Exhaustion weighed heavily on Alex as he met Marcus and Jenna for lunch. The campus cafeteria buzzed with life, a stark contrast to his own deteriorating state. "Man, you look awful," Marcus said, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you feeling okay?" "Just haven't been sleeping well," Alex mumbled, poking at his food. "Still obsessing over that mirror?" Jenna asked. Alex hesitated, debating whether to share his experiences. I think there's something wrong with it." Jenna exchanged a glance with Marcus. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I saw something in the mirror, a figure, and I felt it touch me." Marcus frowned. "Like an intruder?" Did you call the police? No, it's not like that, Alex said, frustration creeping into his voice. It's inside the mirror. An awkward silence settled over the table. Maybe you're just stressed, Jenna offered gently. Midterms are coming up, and you've been digging into all this creepy stuff. Yeah, could be hallucinations, Marcus added. Sleep deprivation can mess with your head. Alex clenched his jaw. I'm not imagining this. Okay, Jenna said carefully. How about we come over tonight? Keep you company. He wanted to refuse but realized he didn't want to be alone. Fine. That evening the three gathered in Alex's apartment. The mirror dominated the living room, its presence oppressive. So, this is it? Marcus approached the mirror, peering into it. Looks old. Be careful, Alex warned. Marcus chuckled nervously. What? You think it's haunted? Jenna examined the carvings. These symbols are strange. As they inspected the mirror, Alex felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. The room grew colder. Do you feel that? He whispered. A shadow flickered across the mirror's surface. Jenna gasped. Did you see that? See what? Marcus asked, turning to her. I thought I saw. Never mind. Alex stepped forward. It's happening. The lights flickered, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and writhe. The figure appeared again in the mirror, clearer this time, a tall silhouette with elongated limbs and eyes like hollow voids. Do you see it now? Alex's voice trembled. Marcus stared, his face pale. What the hell is that? The figure's mouth moved, though no sound came forth. Then, a cacophony of whispers flooded the room, incomprehensible and overwhelming. Make it stop, Jenna cried, covering her ears. Alex reached out impulsively and touched the mirror's surface. A shock coursed through him, and the whispers ceased. The figure vanished. The three stood in stunned silence, the only sound their ragged breathing. We need to get rid of this thing, Marcus said finally. Maybe we should call someone, Jenna suggested. A priest or an exorcist. Alex shook his head. I need to understand what it wants. Are you serious? Marcus stared at him incredulously. This isn't a game, Alex. I know it's not, Alex snapped, but it's connected to me somehow. I can't just walk away. Marcus threw up his hands. This is insane. Jenna placed a hand on Alex's arm. We'll help you figure this out, okay? But we have to be careful. Alex nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. He sensed that his friends couldn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation, or the pull the mirror had on him. After they left, the apartment felt emptier than before. Alex sat before the mirror, exhaustion and resignation settling in. What do you want from me? He whispered. This time the response was clear. A single word formed on the mirror's surface, etched in frost. You. Chapter 5. The next few days blurred together as Alex delved deeper into his research. He skipped classes, ignored calls, and spent hours scouring obscure texts and online forums. The mirror's presence was a constant, an unspoken demand for attention. Marcus and Jenna grew increasingly worried. They arrived unannounced one afternoon, finding the apartment in disarray, books strewn about, curtains drawn, the air thick with neglect. Alex, this has to stop, Jenna pleaded. You're isolating yourself. He barely looked up from his notebook. I'm close to figuring it out. Marcus frowned. Figuring what out? You're chasing shadows. The Watcher is an entity that exists between worlds, Alex said, his voice taut with conviction. It observes, influences. The mirror is its conduit. This is madness, Marcus said. You need help. Alex's eyes flashed with irritation. I don't expect you to understand. Try us, Jenna said softly. We're your friends. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I've been communicating with it. I think it wants me to join it. Join it? Jenna echoed. What does that mean? I'm not sure yet, but I feel like I'm being pulled in. Marcus shook his head. This is beyond us. Please, let's talk to someone. A professional. Alex stood abruptly. If you're not here to help, maybe you should leave. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Fine, Marcus said finally. But we're not giving up on you. They left, and as the door closed, Alex felt a pang of regret tempered by relief. Distractions were a luxury he couldn't afford. That night, the boundary between dreams and reality dissolved. Alex found himself standing before the mirror, though he didn't recall getting up. The surface rippled like water, and the Watcher emerged, its form more defined, a being of shadows and whispers. Why me? Alex asked, his voice echoing strangely. You are the key. The Watcher's voice resonated within his mind, a chorus of echoes. Through you, the veil thins. I don't understand, he said, fear and awe intertwining. Join us, and all will be revealed. A hand extended from the mirror, elongated fingers beckoning. Alex felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, his own hand moving of its own accord. Just as their fingertips were about to touch, a loud crash jolted him awake. He was back in his living room, the morning light seeping through a crack in the curtains. The mirror stood untouched. Heart pounding, he searched for the source of the noise. A book had fallen from the shelf, a journal he hadn't noticed before. Picking it up, he realized it belonged to his great-uncle Frederick. Flipping through the pages, he found entries detailing similar experiences, visions of the Watcher, the pull of the mirror, the descent into obsession. The final pages were a scrawl of frantic warnings. It wants a successor. I have sealed it for now, but the binding weakens. If you are reading this, do not trust it. Destroy the mirror before it's too late. Alex's hands shook. The inheritance wasn't a gift, it was a passing of a curse. The Watcher needed him to break the seal, to cross over. A surge of determination coursed through him. He wouldn't be a pawn. He would find a way to stop this, to end it once and for all. But deep within, a whisper of doubt lingered, and the Watcher's presence loomed ever closer. Chapter 6. The sun hung low in the sky as Alex made his way to the university archives, a place seldom visited by students. The building was old, its architecture Gothic, with stone gargoyles leering from the corners. Inside, the scent of aged paper and dust filled the air. He had spent the morning poring over his great-uncle's journal, deciphering the cryptic entries. The name, The Watcher, appeared repeatedly, always accompanied by warnings and fragmented sketches of the mirror's symbols. Determined to uncover the truth, Alex sought out any records of the Watcher in the university's extensive collection. Hours slipped by as he sifted through brittle manuscripts and faded microfilms. At last he stumbled upon a reference in a 17th-century grimoire. The Watcher, he read aloud. A sentinel of the in-between, bound to observe the mortal realm through reflective surfaces. Those who attract its gaze risk becoming conduits, bridges to worlds unseen. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The text went on to describe how the Watcher could manipulate perceptions, erode sanity, and ultimately consume the soul of its chosen. Chosen, he muttered. Why me? A sudden thud echoed through the silent archive. He looked up, but no one was there. The overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and writhe. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Gathering the documents, he hastily exited the archives. Outside, Dusk had fallen, and the campus was eerily quiet. As he walked, he felt an unshakable sensation of being followed. He glanced over his shoulder repeatedly, but the pathways were empty. Returning home, Alex locked the door behind him and double-checked the windows. The mirror awaited him, dark and imposing. The symbols on its frame appeared to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. He approached cautiously. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. The mirror's surface rippled, and the watcher's form emerged, more vivid than ever before. Its eyes bored into his, endless voids that threatened to swallow his very essence. "The time draws near," the entity intoned, its voice a chorus of echoes. "The veil thins, and you shall be the gateway." "Gateway to what?" Alex shouted, fear and anger intertwining. "I won't let you use me." The watcher's mouth curved into a semblance of a smile. "You have no choice. The binding weakens, and soon our realms will merge." Desperation clawed at Alex. There must be a way to stop this. The image faded, and the mirror returned to its normal state. Alex sank to the floor, his mind racing. His great-uncle had sealed the watcher before. Perhaps he could do the same. He retrieved the journal, flipping to the final pages. Amidst the frantic scrawls, he found a ritual, a binding meant to trap the watcher, but it required components and knowledge he didn't possess. An occult expert, he realized. Someone who can help me perform the ritual. Clutching the journal, he resolved to find such a person no matter the cost. Time was running out, and the boundary between his world and the Watcher's was weakening with each passing moment. Chapter 7. The following day, Alex reached out to every contact he could think of, scouring online forums and esoteric communities. His friends' calls went unanswered. He couldn't risk involving them further. Finally, a lead emerged. A reclusive occultist named Dr. Evelyn Hartman, rumored to possess deep knowledge of ancient rituals. She was said to reside on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. That evening, Alex drove through winding roads shrouded in fog, the landscape becoming increasingly desolate. The GPS led him to an old Victorian house, its windows dark, the garden overgrown with twisted plants. He hesitated before knocking on the heavy wooden door. After a tense moment, it creaked open, revealing a woman with sharp features and piercing grey eyes. "Dr. Hartman?" he ventured. She regarded him coolly. "I know why you're here, Alex Monroe." He blinked in surprise. "You know me?" She stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "There are forces at play that concern us both." Inside, the house was a labyrinth of bookshelves, strange artifacts, and flickering candles casting dancing shadows on the walls. She led him to a study filled with arcane symbols etched into the floor. "You've encountered the Watcher," she stated. "Yes," he admitted. "I need to seal it away like my great-uncle did." Dr. Hartman nodded slowly. "Frederick tried, but his binding was temporary. The Watcher is persistent, and now it is fixated on you. How do I stop it?" She sighed. "There is a ritual, but it's dangerous. It requires confronting the Watcher directly, using the mirror as a focal point. If you fail, you risk being pulled into its realm permanently." Alex swallowed hard. "I have to try." "Very well," she said, her gaze steady. "We must prepare immediately. The convergence is imminent." They spent the next several hours gathering rare herbs, drawing intricate sigils, and reciting incantations in languages long forgotten. As midnight approached, Dr. Hartman handed Alex a small, ornate dagger, inscribed with protective runes. "This will anchor you to our world," she explained. "Do not lose it." Together, they returned to his apartment. The atmosphere inside was oppressive, the air thick with an otherworldly energy. The mirror seemed to pulse with a dark light, shadows swirling within. "Begin the ritual," Dr. Hartman instructed, positioning herself at the edge of the room. Alex stood before the mirror, the dagger in one hand, his great-uncle's journal in the other. He began to chant the binding words, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The mirror's surface rippled violently, and the Watcher emerged, its form towering and more menacing than ever. "You cannot resist," it thundered. "The gateway opens." A force pulled at Alex, threatening to drag him into the mirror. He gripped the dagger tightly, continuing the incantation. Dr. Hartman joined in, her voice amplifying the ritual's power. The room shook, objects levitating and crashing around them. A howling wind whipped through the space, though the windows remained closed. "Hold on!" Dr. Hartman shouted over the cacophony. The Watcher reached out, its shadowy hand closing around Alex's wrist. Pain shot through him as icy tendrils seeped into his skin. "Finish the ritual," Dr. Hartman urged. Summoning every ounce of willpower, Alex uttered the final words. The dagger glowed brightly, and a searing light erupted from it, striking the Watcher. A deafening roar filled the room as the entity recoiled, its form disintegrating into wisps of darkness. The mirror shattered, shards exploding outward. Alex shielded his face, feeling cuts sting his skin. Then silence. Breathing heavily, he opened his eyes. The mirror was destroyed, and the Watcher was gone. Dr. Hartman approached cautiously. "It's over," she said softly. Alex nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you," he whispered. But as he looked around, something felt off. The room's shadows seemed deeper, and Dr. Hartman's expression held a hint of sorrow. "What's wrong?" he asked. She met his gaze. "I'm sorry, Alex. Some doors once opened cannot be fully closed." A chill settled in his bones. He glanced at his reflection in a remaining shard of the mirror. For a split second, he saw the Watcher's eyes staring back. Chapter 8. In the days that followed, Alex tried to return to normalcy. The mirror was gone, and the Watcher defeated, or so he hoped. But unsettling changes began to manifest. His reflection in windows and polished surfaces lingered a moment too long, mirroring expressions he hadn't made. Shadows clung to him like a second skin, and people around him seemed distant, their voices muffled. At the university, classmates avoided his gaze. Marcus and Jenna were nowhere to be found, their numbers disconnected. When he inquired about them, others claimed not to know who he was talking about. Panic set in. He visited Marcus's dorm, but a stranger answered, insisting no one named Marcus had ever lived there. Jenna's apartment was vacant, the landlord claiming it had been unoccupied for months. Desperate, he sought out Dr. Hartman. Returning to her house, he found it abandoned, cobwebs draping the doorway. Inside, dust coated every surface, and the air was stale, as if untouched for years. "This can't be happening," he muttered, heart pounding. He retreated to his apartment, only to find the door ajar. Inside, everything was gone. Furniture, belongings, even the marks on the walls where pictures once hung. A man in a maintenance uniform appeared behind him. "Can I help you?" he asked. "This is my apartment," Alex stammered. The man frowned. "Sorry, buddy, but this unit's been empty for a while. You need to leave." Feeling as though he were losing his grip on reality, Alex fled into the street. The city around him seemed unfamiliar, the buildings taller, the streets narrower, the sky a shade darker. He tried calling his parents, but the number was out of service. His student ID was unrecognized at the university library. It was as if he had been erased from existence. Exhausted and terrified, He wandered until he found himself back at the university archives. The building was derelict, windows boarded up. Yet, a faint light glowed from within. Drawn to it, he entered cautiously. In the dim interior, he saw a figure hunched over a table, a man who looked strikingly familiar. As he approached, the man turned. Alex gasped. It was his great-uncle Frederick, appearing just as he did in old photographs. "Uncle Frederick," he whispered. The man shook his head. "No, Alex, not anymore." Realization dawned. "The Watcher," he breathed. Frederick's features shifted, the eyes turning into endless voids. "You are beginning to understand," the entity said. "What have you done to me?" Alex demanded. "You shattered the mirror, but in doing so you broke the barrier completely. Now, you exist between worlds as I do." "No," Alex protested. "I defeated you. You cannot defeat what is eternal. We are bound now, successors in an endless chain." Alex felt a crushing despair. Is there any way to undo this? The Watcher regarded him with something akin to pity. "Acceptance is the only path. Observe as I have. In time, you will see the universe in ways mortals cannot fathom." The surroundings faded, and Alex found himself in a void, stars swirling around him. He could see distant galaxies, hear the whispers of cosmic winds, feel the pulse of existence itself. But with this vast perception came isolation. He was disconnected from humanity, a silent observer unable to interact or be seen. "Is this my fate?" he whispered into the abyss. No answer came, only the echo of his own voice. Chapter 9. Time lost meaning as Alex drifted through the in-between. He watched civilizations rise and fall, stars ignite and fade, all from a detached perspective. The weight of eternity pressed upon him, a crushing loneliness that eroded his sense of self. Yet fragments of his former life clung to him. Memories of laughter with friends, the warmth of sunlight on his skin, the simple pleasures of being human. These memories became both a comfort and a torment. One day, or perhaps eons later, he sensed a disturbance. A familiar presence flickered at the edge of his awareness. Focusing his consciousness, he perceived a young woman standing before a mirror he recognized instantly. It was Jenna. She gazed into the reflective surface, her eyes hollow with grief. "I wish I knew what happened to you, Alex," she whispered. He felt a surge of emotion. "Jenna!" he called out, but his voice did not reach her. She turned away, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met through the mirror. Her expression shifted, as if she sensed something. "Alex," she murmured, stepping closer. Desperate to connect, he focused all his energy, projecting his presence. The mirror's surface shimmered, and his faint outline appeared. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God." "Jenna, it's me," he tried to say, but the words were lost in the void. She reached out, fingertips brushing the glass. Tears welled in her eyes. "What happened to you?" He willed himself to communicate, and a single word formed on the mirror. "Trapped." She gasped. "How can I help you?" Hope stirred within him. Perhaps there was a way back. He recalled fragments of his great-uncle's journal, the mention of a reversal ritual. But even as he considered it, the Watcher's presence loomed. "Interference is forbidden," it intoned. "No," Alex resisted. "I won't be a prisoner." A struggle ensued within the in-between, Alex pitting his will against the Watcher's. The cosmic forces tore at him, threatening to dissolve his very essence. Jenna watched in horror as the mirror's surface darkened, shadows swirling violently. Alex, with a final surge of determination, he broke free momentarily. "Find Dr. Hartman's notes," he managed to inscribe on the glass. "Hurry." Understanding the urgency, Jenna nodded. "I'll find a way." The connection severed abruptly as the Watcher reasserted control. "You cannot escape your destiny," it warned. But Alex had ignited a spark of hope. If Jenna could find a way to reverse the ritual, perhaps he could reclaim his humanity. Chapter 10. Jenna delved into researching the occult, retracing Alex's steps. She found references to Dr. Evelyn Hartman and sought her out, eventually locating her in a small town several miles away. Dr. Hartman was reluctant at first, her eyes wary. "I told Alex not to proceed alone," she said grimly. "Please," Jenna pleaded. "He's trapped, and I need your help to bring him back." The older woman sighed. "Very well. But know that meddling with such forces carries great risk." Together, they devised a plan to perform a retrieval ritual, a dangerous endeavor that could potentially draw the Watcher's wrath. They gathered the necessary components: rare herbs, protective talismans, and most importantly, a mirror that once belonged to Alex's great-uncle, a mirror connected to the original. On the night of the new moon, they set up the ritual space in Jenna's apartment. Candles flickered around the room, casting elongated shadows. Dr. Hartman began the incantation, her voice steady and authoritative. As the ritual progressed, the mirror's surface began to glow. Jenna concentrated on Alex, visualizing his face, recalling memories of their friendship. In the void, Alex sensed a pull, a beacon guiding him. He moved towards it, the Watcher's presence pressing against him, trying to hold him back. "You belong here," the entity hissed. "No," Alex declared. "I belong with the living." Summoning all his strength, he broke through the barrier. The mirror in Jenna's apartment cracked, a blinding light filling the room. When the light subsided, Alex lay on the floor, gasping for breath. Jenna rushed to his side. "Alex, you're back." He looked up at her, relief and joy flooding his features. "You did it," he whispered. Dr. Hartman watched cautiously. "We must be careful. The connection may not be fully severed." At that moment, the room's temperature dropped sharply. The candles extinguished simultaneously, plunging them into darkness. A deep, resonant voice filled the air. "You cannot escape me." Shadows coalesced into the Watcher's form, towering over them. Dr. Hartman brandished a talisman, chanting protective spells. "Stand behind me," she instructed. The Watcher advanced, the air thick with malevolent energy. "Your efforts are futile." Desperate, Alex realized that the only way to end this was to confront the Watcher directly. He stepped forward, despite Jenna's protests. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Balance must be maintained. A Watcher is required." "Then take me," Dr. Hartman declared suddenly. "Release him, and take me in his stead." "Dr. Hartman, no," Alex exclaimed. She glanced back at him. "My time in this world is nearing its end. Let me make this sacrifice." The Watcher considered her offer. A soul for a soul. Before anyone could react, shadows engulfed Dr. Hartman, her body collapsed, and the Watcher's form dissipated, the oppressive energy lifting. Silence settled over the room, Jenna's eyes filled with tears. "She's gone." Alex knelt beside Dr. Hartman's lifeless body, guilt and sorrow washing over him. "She saved me." The mirror shattered completely, fragments scattering across the floor. The connection was broken. Chapter 11. In the aftermath, Alex and Jenna struggled to process what had happened. They contacted the authorities anonymously, ensuring Dr. Hartman's body was treated with respect. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Alex resumed his studies, though the experience had changed him profoundly. One afternoon, while walking through the campus courtyard, he felt a familiar chill. He glanced at a nearby window and saw, just for an instant, Dr. Hartman's reflection smiling softly before fading away. He shared the experience with Jenna. "Do you think she's at peace?" he asked. She nodded. "I believe she is." Yet shadows lingered at the edges of his vision, and sometimes, in moments of quiet reflection, he thought he could hear distant whispers. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, he received a package with no return address. Inside was a journal, Dr. Hartman's personal notebook. A letter accompanied it. "Alex," it read, "if you're reading this, then I have succeeded in freeing you. My life's work has been dedicated to understanding the balance between realms. I sensed that my journey was nearing its conclusion, and I was prepared to make the necessary sacrifice. Use this knowledge wisely, and remember that with understanding comes responsibility. Evelyn Hartman." He opened the journal, its pages filled with detailed studies of entities like the Watcher, protective rituals, and notes on maintaining cosmic balance. As he read, a realization dawned on him. The Watcher was just one of many entities interacting with the human world. The veil between realms was fragile, and without guardians to protect it, others could exploit it. Perhaps this was Dr. Hartman's true intention, not just to save him, but to pass on her mantle. "With understanding comes responsibility," he echoed. Chapter 12. Embracing this newfound purpose, Alex dedicated himself to studying the occult, guided by Dr. Hartman's journal. He and Jenna grew closer, their shared experiences forging a deep bond. Together, they sought out others knowledgeable in esoteric matters, forming a small circle committed to protecting the balance between realms. One night, as they conducted a protective ritual, Alex felt a presence, a familiar one. But this time, it was not malevolent. A soft glow illuminated the room, and Dr. Hartman's spirit appeared before them. "Thank you," she said, her voice echoing gently. "Continue the work. The world needs guardians." Before they could respond, she faded away, leaving behind a sense of peace. Alex looked at Jenna, a determined light in his eyes. "We're not alone in this." She smiled. "No, we're not." They knew challenges lay ahead, forces that would test their resolve. But they also knew that together they could face whatever darkness came their way. As they extinguished the candles, the room filled with a comforting darkness, no longer a source of fear but a canvas upon which they would paint a new future. The end.